Hello and welcome to the M&A Science Podcast. This podcast is part of a mission to rethink how M&A is done. The old school seller-led approach, it's dead. Buyer-led M&A is about strategy, alignment, and efficiency, putting value creation at the center of every deal. And let's be real, it's not about closing the deal, it's about making it successful. We uncover what truly works in M&A by learning directly from the best. I'm your host, Kison Patel, founder and CEO of Deal Room and chief scientist at M&A Science. Joining me today is Rob Brown, CEO of Lincoln International. Lincoln International is a global investment banking firm specializing in M&A advisory and strategic financial services. Under his leadership, Lincoln has expanded his presence in key international markets, leveraging AI for deal efficiency, and refined its approach to integrating acquisitions. In this episode, we discuss Lincoln International's strategic growth through acquisitions, how they evaluate cultural versus commercial fit, and their approach to geographic expansion. We'll also get into AI and M&A, shifting from a seller-led and buyer-led deal making, and best practices for successful integrations. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Hey, thanks for hosting me. This is Lincoln's global headquarters.
This is our global headquarters. Absolutely.
And
we're proud to be headquartered in Chicago.
I'm excited to have this interview. Gotten to know you over the years. I think back in the day, it was
Many years, well over a decade.
When I first met you, I think it was a couple hundred. I don't know if you had 200 people back in Lincoln.
Yeah, it might have been. We probably had 200 people. Today, we're well over 1,000.
So the firm has grown massively.
Lots of overhead.
I reached out to you too. I had some things top of mind. I was actually working a deal in Europe, and I was thinking, man, there's all these nuances with doing something international. And then actually read you've done some international acquisitions. You run a global footprint of organization because you have offices all across the globe. Can we kick off with just a little introduction about yourself and the firm?
Sure. As you noted, I'm Chief Executive Officer of Lincoln. I was their 7th employee 27 years ago. We just celebrated our 29th anniversary on April 1st, and I joined soon after that as employee number 7. So while the hat I wear today is CEO, I have worn pretty much every hat here. And prior to that, I spent 8 years with Price Waterhouse before they added the C and became PwC in audit, transaction services, and then in their wholly owned broker-dealer doing middle market or private capital M&A. And so, as I said, I've had pretty much every job here. And today, my role is really to set our strategy with our global management committee, and then help drive it. And a key part of our strategy has been growth. We have been managed to maximize growth, not managed to maximize profitability. And as you note, acquisitions or group hires or things really just beyond organic growth have become an important part of our strategy. And I think as our market is consolidating, will play an even larger part of our strategy going forward.
What's it like being the CEO, 1,000-person investment bank? What's the real day-to-day life look like?
It changes every day. I think, one of the things that's made Lincoln a success from the very beginning has been an entrepreneurial spirit and an entrepreneurial culture. And so what I try to do is get up every day and remember that, being entrepreneurial, having entrepreneurs within the firm that see opportunities and aren't afraid to take risks to capitalize on them, that's an important part of what we do. And so, I love getting up every day and going to work. It's exciting. Some days there's a lot, to you point out, I've got a lot of people relying on me to make the right decisions and to take the firm in the right place. So what really has motivated me, and somebody once asked me recently to say, what's been the most rewarding thing of your career? And I think the most rewarding thing is seeing leaders of this firm today who I helped recruit as analysts or associates. Because one of the unique things of Lincoln is the longevity of our people. And as I think about the impact they're having on the firm and they're going to have long after I'm gone, that's been the most rewarding thing.
I noticed that the culture is different because early days, I think that's kind of the backstory. When I first started the company, I spent a good 3 years just focused on selling to banks. and then we sort of pivoted more to the buy side model. And your bank had a different culture. It wasn't as pretentious of we only hire from Ivy League schools. Like, is that true? Is that
Yeah, I think what's been interesting for us is even since we started the firm, when we decided to essentially start the firm, and there was 7 of us sitting around a table, we wanted to grow something. We from the very beginning, even how we named the firm, right? We didn't name it after any of the founding people. We wanted to name it for something that stood for more than us, that was going to outlive us. And at that very young age, we said, well, how are we going to grow? We have competitors that have been around for decades, and it's a really competitive market. And we said, are we smarter than our competitors? No. Are we going to pay more than our competitors? No. Are we going to work on more interesting deals than our competitors? No. You want to scale something that can get to all of that being equal pretty quickly. What we decided was we could really differentiate ourselves on culture in an industry that's not known for really good cultures, and a culture that is really kind of rooted in attracting, retaining, and engaging talent for the long term. And so in the beginning, we could kind of see that culture, but as we started to scale in multiple offices and multiple products, multiple geographies, we realized we had to define it at a granular level, we had to measure against it, and we had to manage to it. And so we very actively manage our culture. We've got a 60-page culture document that we send to every employee. We have an engagement survey we do every year, because when engagement's high, we're living up to our cultural promise. Where we see it falling off, we're not. We do focus groups when we see it falling off. And we manage to it. So for us, it's been something we've identified as an asset very early and really worked hard to institutionalize it. And that's a big part of the job of leadership around here, is maintaining our culture while we grow. Because if you grow too fast, maybe you can deteriorate it, but part of the culture is growth. And it'll get into how we think about acquisitions.
What's like the summary on culture in like a sentence?
I mean, I think if we had to say the summary of our culture in a sentence, it's a culture of collaboration, it's a culture of respect, it's a culture of growth, and it's a culture of entrepreneurialism.
Nice. I want to go back to this growth expansion. How do you think through organic versus inorganic? Because the firm obviously has been growing organically, and I'm kind of
we've had the most organic in this past year. We've hired over 30 managing directors, and that was very intentional. We got to the end of 2023, and we said, okay, our market's getting closer towards the end of this recalibration. Now's the time when there's noise in a market, better people are available. So we changed our strategy, and our approach became very targeted, worked with different partners. So organic growth is still the biggest driver of our growth, which is hiring lateral talent. If you look at our managing directors over the last several years, it's about 50% internally promoted and about 50% lateral. And we like that mix because we've got a great pipeline of internal people. You supplement that with expertise and just thoughts and experiences from outside the firm. And then the next piece of that is then supplementing that with acquisition. So organic growth, incredibly important to us. And I think one of the things that organic growth from lateral managing directors and acquisitions have in common for us is there has to be a strong cultural fit, right? You evaluate these things based on a commercial fit or need and a cultural fit. And I think just given the importance of culture that you and I just discussed, for us, that cultural fit is really, really important. And when we are looking at an acquisition and we sense that that's really good and it gets stronger the more we learn, we go after it very aggressively. Conversely, there's been some deals as we've dug into them, we realize this isn't going to work culturally. We put the brakes on.
That's interesting. Okay, wait, go back to the business case of doing inorganic, like the acquisitions. If you got good organic growth, then...
Yeah, but I think what's happening when you get to a scale, I think there's two things going on. Our market is consolidating. There is emerging, and there has been for the last several years, but I think it's becoming more acute, kind of a bulge bracket of the private capital markets, and that's how we define our expertise. We are experts in the private capital markets. There's the public markets, the public-to-public stuff. There's the private. We are experts in the private. And by the way, we love our space. It's 5 to 6 times larger than the public markets. It's growing faster, and it's less cyclical. But I think as our markets have developed, no different than what happened to the bulge bracket firms in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s when there was a lot of consolidation, I think you're starting to see that in our market as well. And we want to be one of those. We are one of the leaders. We want to be the leader. And so I think you get to a scale where if you want to keep up the growth rate and you want to, and by the way, one of the things I didn't mention about growth and why it's so important to us is what we found is the best talent wants to be on a growing platform, right? They want to know they're a firm where there's going to be white space, where there's going to be growth for them personally and professionally. And we think it's kind of a virtuous cycle. The more you're growing, the higher quality talent you attract. The higher quality talent you attract, the more you grow. But if you want to maintain a certain growth rate at our size now, you're going to have to look at acquisitions in a more material way. And the way we've done it is we look at acquisitions in kind of two buckets. And by the way, there's a gray line in our business between an acquisition and like a group hire or a group lift out, right? Those can look like acquisitions, and some of those group lift outs can be as large as an acquisition. But we look at, we will look at areas that we say, okay, what are acquisitions that can be tuck-ins to what we're doing, but can really add to us materially? And that's the last two acquisitions we've done, which we'll talk about, a tech deal in the U.S. and a tech deal in Europe. And then we've looked at certain acquisitions, and we're looking at some now where we say, boy, we really would like to be in that sector in a material way. And given our size, if we're going to do something in a material way, it's probably going to have to be an acquisition. We're not in financial institutions in a material way. That would be an area that would make more sense to do through acquisition. We're not in real estate in a material way, and there's some other areas. So we tend to look at what are areas we can accelerate through acquisitions. What are new areas we may want to get into where it's going to be hard to build organically? And as I said, across both of those, there's full-on acquisitions, and then there's potentially group hires.
This episode is sponsored by Deal Room, the M&A platform purpose-built for buyer-led M&A. If you're in corporate development, you know how chaotic things can get. Juggling Excel trackers, email threads, shared drives, and 4 different tools just to get basic updates. Deal Room puts you back in control. It's an end-to-end platform designed specifically for buyers. You get one place to manage pipeline, diligence, and integration with built-in project management, real-time commenting, and automatic stakeholder notifications. You can templatize your rooms, run bulk permission updates across deals, and even use AI-powered contract analysis. With Deal Room, you're not just chasing people or reconciling data across tools, you're actually running a repeatable, scalable M&A process the way a buyer should on your terms. Click the link in the description to learn more. Let's get back to the episode. So overall, big ambitious growth goal, and then you have sector focuses and then geography. And you sort of...
Yeah, I think geography is interesting for us because if you look at where we're at today globally, we're in the top economies in the world. We probably account for, if you look at the countries we're in today, we probably account for 99% of all activity. So there's no big geography we have to be in. I would say, the one, I think if we were to do an acquisition geographically, the next one would likely be Australia. And we have a partner there who's a great partner that could become part of Lincoln. But there's no geography that we say, oh my gosh, there's so much activity going on there, we need to be in that geography. But if we find a group of bankers that add to us from an industry or a product standpoint and they're in a new geography, we would do that. One area we are planting a flag in here shortly is in the Middle East, and that's going to be the first, and that's through a lateral hire. That's going to be the first geography we lead with valuations into because the sovereign wealth funds and a lot of the money in the Middle East, there's a need for valuation work there. And so that would be an area, that's one area we're probably saying, gee, that's a geography we should be in. We're going to lead with valuations, and we could very well backfill with merger and acquisition or other advisory capabilities.
Let's talk about this deal you did in Germany.
So the TCG deal was interesting because when we look at our goal and our vision is to have all of our industry groups and all of our product groups to be balanced globally, right? We have this approach where if anybody works with Lincoln anywhere in the world, they should be getting the global reach of the firm. We have this thing called glocal. We want to be locally deep and globally integrated. And so when we looked across our industry groups, one of the areas where we had an imbalance is we had a much larger tech practice in the U.S. than we did in Europe. And most of our groups were a little more balanced. And so we really wanted to scale technology in Europe. And we were looking for some lateral hires, but we realized it's going to be hard because we're going to continue to scale in the U.S. It's going to be hard for Europe to catch up unless we could have some chunkier growth there. And so we actually, very proactively, we're thinking about targets in Europe in the tech world. And we had some detailed discussions with other partners, other potential parties that didn't work out. And one for very squarely culture. Commercially, it could have been a very good fit. But TCG was interesting because one of our partners in Germany mentioned TCG about a year before we did the deal and said, hey, it's a startup, but the principals here, they were at another investment bank, Mummert, that got sold to Raymond James sometime in the teens, 2015, 16. And they left, and they had formed this bank, and really around IT services, a little bit of software, but it was really a startup year earlier. What happened is I was in Germany last summer, and I met the founder, Harry, and I met in Frankfurt, and I walked out of that meeting feeling like this is a company we should acquire. We should merge these two firms. Harry sees the world the way we do. And his firm was only 3 years old when we acquired it. So we met in July. We flew Harry to Chicago in August. We had a handshake deal in September, and we closed the deal in October because we had an opportunity. This was a situation, the more we learned about his business and their business, and there was 5 managing directors, the more we felt, boy, the commercial case here is great, but as importantly, the cultural case got stronger and stronger. And of their 5 MDs, 3 cover IT services, 1 covers software, and 1 covers consumer, but more in the digital economy and consumer. And so that was just one of those situations where you meet somebody and you see the world so eye to eye that you say we should really do something. And then the more people we met there and the more we understood about where they were at, it was really going to balance. It doubled the number of tech, almost doubled the number of tech managing directors that we had in Europe.
How's the process different of doing a deal in Europe versus if you would have done it domestically, which we'll do the next example?
What's interesting? From a regulatory standpoint, there was more complications, right? They were in multiple countries in Europe. And the business was headquartered in Germany. And we have a very large presence in Germany. So we were already in fact, I think it just got published, we're the #1 M&A advisor in Germany. So we knew that market. We had people in the market that knew that market. So in this particular case, it wasn't that different because we knew this geography really, really well.
It's more of an add-on than...
Yeah, it was more of it was an add-on, but it was more than that, right? It was an add-on. We're really large in Frankfurt. TCG was headquartered in Munich, so it was a different city. But there was some compliance elements of it. You have to go through the different M&A approval bodies in Europe, which was more legal at the end. But as I think about like building the commercial case, building the cultural case, thinking about how we're going to integrate this, it really wasn't that different because we're already in all these countries in Europe, and we understand the nuances of how you do business in different countries. And in Europe, that's probably the tricky thing in Europe and why we love this approach we have called Glocal, is that the nuances of doing business, it's different in Germany than it is in France, than it is in the UK, than it is in Italy, right? The US is a huge market. From how you do deals, how you approach buyers, how you market things, buyer behavior, it's pretty homogeneous. It's very different in Europe. But we'd built up that knowledge over 20 years. So doing a TCG, because we had that knowledge, was easier for us to do, and in some ways we viewed as less risky than if this was our first foray into the German market.
Part of this interview, Rob, is just getting like free advice out of you. And one of the things I was curious on the cultural difference, I looked at a deal in Germany and I felt like it was so black and white around, show me the numbers, show me give me a price in front, where I feel like in the US, you do a lot of courting. You spend some time really getting to know each other, get comfortability. And I feel like we'll talk more detail on the cultural fit, but like more of those things that you have confidence in, more comfortability you are to pay more. And I felt like that's something I struggled with. And I'm just sort of curious in your perception, how could I handle that better?
It somewhat gets on the seller too. I mean, certain cultures can be very direct. Like, here's my numbers. Tell me what you'll pay me. Right.
That's it. It's just give me a price. And I'm like, well, how do I know we're going to get along after this deal and support a transition?
Well, I think one of the things you have to do as an acquirer of businesses is put yourself in the seller's shoes, right? And say, okay, where do they sit in the evolution, right? What's important to them? So if somebody's coming to you and saying, hey, I'm going to give you this, I don't really want to spend more time with you till I know the price is right. They may have been burned with somebody else spending a bunch of time, right? So you have to kind of understand where they're coming from. And I think be responsive to them. Say, hey, all right, based on what you've given me, I can give you a range, but hey, I'd really love, why don't I come have dinner with you and we can talk about my offer? Like, then you can kind of force the getting to know them and the, because I think sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to give you a price until put yourself in their shoes and understand, why is this what they want when they want it? Because you're not gonna buy a company till you can get comfort with everything you need to get comfort with.
They probably want to know if I'm serious or not.
Yeah, and maybe it's not in the order you would have wanted, but I think you have to try to be attentive to a seller's needs. And value is always important, right? But there's always other things that are important to them. And I think part of your job as an acquirer should be finding out and understanding what's important to them, because that's going to help you get to the finish line, as opposed to, well, this is the way we acquire things and you better fit within our process.
Should I have given them a range?
Yeah, I would probably give them a range. I mean, if somebody's giving you financials and you don't have anything else, right? And they're saying, hey, before I engage with you, I kind of want to know where you're at. Give them a range. I think, a seller wants to know, hey, are we in the same zip code before you don't have to be precise. And it's also the advice we give to our clients when we're representing on the buy side. Like, don't take yourself out of a process by pointing out all the things that you have concerns about or all the risk items. They've given you information. Put a value down and say, these are all our assumptions, and if all of this checks out, we can be at this value, knowing that if it doesn't check out, then maybe things can change. But don't, sometimes sellers say, well, we're at this value because we have all these risk items. Well, you may have taken yourself out of it. May end up trading at that value, but you've taken yourselves out by making assumptions before you have all the facts.
But I don't want to be too ambitious and give them something that's like a high range when I end up on the bottom of it.
No. I think you have to be authentic.
I'm trying to figure out how to balance this out, Rob, because I'm cheap. I'm just putting it on the table.
I know
that.
Listen,
it's in my DNA. I was raised this by immigrant parents.
Sellers want to sell high, buyers want to buy low. But
that's why I do the relationship thing. Yeah. It's like, hey, then we come with some amicable terms.
But I think if you put a range and you say, gee, if all this does check out, I could be at the high end of this range. It can't be a no way am I ever going to get this. I'm putting a pie in the sky number out there. But again, you have to put yourself, and then if you get a chance to do diligence, you get a chance to know them, they get a chance to know you, and let's assume something material doesn't check out. Well, you now have a relationship to talk about that, as opposed to bringing that up in the beginning where you don't really have a relationship to trust each other yet.
What are the software companies going for these days?
Less than they were 2 years ago.
That's a good thing.
That I can tell you. Software is interesting because we're seeing a fair amount of activity right now in software, because I think that market has recalibrated down to lower values, still really high values, but we're not seeing things go from the multiple of revenues that they were in 21.
This is why everybody's slapping AI and everything just to get a couple turns higher.
That is interesting. I think the M&A world always has, what's the buzzword, and let's see if we can lever ourselves into that, right? We would sell widget makers that happen to serve the healthcare industry, and they'd be like, we're a healthcare company, and so I think AI is the new, if can we show that our company will benefit from what's going to be an explosion in AI, and I think some of those are very direct paths, some of those are maybe riskier paths, and the buyer has to beware on that.
I'm going to work on putting a range and see where that goes from there.
I always think put yourself in the seller's shoes, and someone's built up this business. This is their baby. They have all their money. They have all their wealth tied up in this business, and you're knocking on their door wanting to acquire them. I think you've got to be responsive to them to develop that relationship.
I think part of it is like we're a business that's bootstrapped. We don't have a sponsor yet. And I think that's some of the things you start looking at where, if you sort of put it together with a sponsor, they got a very different way of valuing.
I think if you put it together with a sponsor, when you're spending other people's money, you can be more aggressive.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Yes, that is the bottom line.
How's it with your firm? What's the capital structure like?
We are 100% partner owned.
What's the pros and cons of like being partner owned as opposed to, you've seen other firms, right? Banks are public. And you got the whole range.
No, I think, we have had this vision to be the best advisor in the private capital markets. And we've had the vision for a long time. And even when we were much smaller, it was very aspirational. Today, it's much, much less aspirational. We are among the best and the most active. In the last 3 years, we're number 2 in the world in representing private equity groups and sell sides, which are the most sophisticated consumers of what we do. And we're much smaller than the firm who's number 1. So to date, we have really felt being a private partnership has been the best way to achieve that goal. I think as we look forward, I think we do have to think a bit more broadly about our capital structure, our governance, our ownership, because, as I told you, in a market that's consolidating, having access to additional capital, whether it's a public security, you've seen Houlihan and Piper use their public security, I think, pretty effectively in doing acquisitions. So, I think that's something we've considered over time. So I think it's something we constantly evaluate, but the real benefit of being a private partnership is we continue to control the culture. Right?
So the rumors are true. IPOs.
There are. I can't confirm or deny any rumors, but I think if you value culture and you want the leadership of the firm to continue to drive that culture, sell and control, I think, becomes something that's difficult. And so you've got to think about other ways maybe to expand your capital base without selling the firm.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's just looking at those capital sources and sort of how they align with the growth that you're and how you can allocate that capital.
You asked me what's it like being CEO. I think one of the things you have to do as CEO is constantly think about the future. What got you to where you're at today, it's going to be different going forward. So I think you constantly have to be evaluating not only your strategy, but you have to be evaluating, your capital structure and your governance. Do you, if this is your strategy and this is your goal, do you have the right capital base to get there?
The deal you did in the U.S.
Spurrier Capital Partners. Yeah, that was really, that's although we had done a small acquisition in Germany years and years ago, we basically merged our German partner into us with all equity. I really view Spurrier as the first, real acquisition we did. They had hired an advisor. They were taught it was within a process, and again, I think Spurrier was commercially, it doubled the number of software bankers that we had in the U.S. But I think the one thing that was really interesting about Spurrier, even as a small firm, they were doing work mostly with private equity, and that was rare. It's rare to see small firms doing a lot of work with private equity because private equity values the deal flow. They value broader institutional relationships. And so Spurrier was really interesting, and from the standpoint of it was all software, which was really additive to what we were doing. It was mostly private equity. It was in New York, where we already had an office. So the commercial case pretty quickly was attractive to us. And then the question was, what about the cultural case? And again, that was another situation where the more people we met there, the more we understood how they looked at the future. It was a great cultural case, and that's how it's played out. Our timing on that wasn't great because we did that deal in May of 2022, just before the bottom fell out of the M&A market. But in terms of what that's done for our tech practice, it's become a material part of our U.S. tech practice.
Yeah, identifying commercial fit seems pretty straightforward.
Yep.
It's just lining with your goals. Are we confident we're going to get these outcomes? The cultural fit's like a tricky thing because I've had to use another deal as an example where I felt management team and I had like great cultural fit, this and that, and then it's a tech deal. So my VP of engineering's like, this isn't going to work. Like they're a completely different way of working. Like this is not going to work. I still want to do the deal because obviously, again, got my agenda, but I'm just curious about that. Like, hey, if culture fit is that big of a factor, should I say, well, since we're riding on tech integration, then we probably shouldn't do this deal if our VP of engineering doesn't want to do it. I'm just curious how you look at it with the firms. Is it just sort of the feel good thing? We go have a beer and like, this seems like good fit, or is there something more, tactical?
I think you bring up a great point. Cultural fit has to be more than just the two leaders, feeling like they see the world the same way. But you have to have that. You have to start with that. So if I think about, our process to kind of assess cultural fit, it's multifold, right? But it starts with, I think, the leadership seeing eye to eye that, hey, you seem to have the same values that we do. You're looking at growth the same way we are. You're thinking about, just in conversations, how do they think about management? How do they think about aligning incentives? How do they think about values? You can start sensing that leader to leader. That's a good place to start because I think a lot of organizations, the culture is a direct reflection of leadership. But you bring up a great point. It can't just be that. I think you have to start with that. Then you have to then say, all right, does this culture permeate their organization? And how does our overall leadership feel about their leadership? So you have to expand the amount of people interacting. I think you also then have to try to find, are there kind of third-party ways to validate a culture? And one of the things we look at is Wall Street Oasis and Glassdoor. Like those are unvarnished views of what do current and former employees think of the culture of that firm. So we tend to look at those, and if you go to those and you say, wow, like the way people, current and former employees, talk about this firm is really different than the way their CEO talks about the firm, that's a red flag, and you got to drill down on that. And so you do tend to look for third-party validation. The other thing we'll do is sometimes if we get further down the line in a confidential way, bring up a firm's name in front of some of your clients and see what they say. Right? What do clients think about
Their reputation factor.
Their reputation. So I think it's multifaceted. It's got to be leader to leader, and then it's got to be kind of team to team. And you point out something that's interesting is that if there's words that say this is our culture, but then you see actions or the way they manage that's very different than that, that's a red flag. And so and by the way, I don't think you're really ever done assessing culture till the day you close, right? Because you keep learning more about them, they keep learning more about you. So it's not we've checked the box on this. One of the things we do for senior hires, and we do it as part of our acquisitions as well, is we have kind of a personality profile assessment that we give to senior people, which it's not perfect, but it's one input in saying, hey, will they kind of fit into our culture? Will they fit into the things we value? And I think some of those third-party tools can be effective as well.
You do that like post-LOI before close?
Yes.
Okay, so my playbook here around the culture is this conversation really digs into leadership styles, values, really understanding what that actually means in practice and seeing how wide that is across our organization, and then having a broader spectrum where it's not just the two leaders at the top, but like the overall management team's perspective on the management team. And then you also mentioned look for ways around using third parties, whether those sources, Glassdoor, Wall Street Oasis. If you don't know, it's a forum from investment banking community. Really funny memes on there. And then also personality tests you mentioned is another tool that you could use. And
we like to say assessment as opposed to test. But
okay,
yes.
Assessment. And then reputation. Just ask around. What's the reputation of the firm? I think those are all.
Yeah, you have to, but again, it's not something that we've confirmed the culture, right? You're going to be taking risk, but you can try to mitigate as much of that risk. Interestingly, we had another deal that we were in the tech space in Europe, and I think we were close to having probably a deal on the table, but that was a situation where the more time we spent together, the more the cultural case deteriorated. One, in the professional services world and investment banking, one of the things you want to ensure is that there's a real institution here, like that a bunch of the revenues aren't tied up in one person, like one key dominant figure. So that is kind of one. Was also observe how they treat each other when you're around them. A key element of assessing culture is how do their people treat each other when they're together, having a dinner with them, being in meetings with them. And you start picking up clues that say, hey, this is in line with our culture, or it's not. And that was a deal we just walked away from, saying culturally, commercially would have been a good fit. It was culturally never going to work. And for us also, we have this part of our strategy is this concept of one firm. Like we don't want to do acquisitions and leave them alone and have them be like, hey, this is a Lincoln business typically. It would have to be something that's a totally separate business. We want to be really one firm. We want everybody to feel as one firm. And if you start realizing in the course of doing diligence that they really don't want to integrate, they want to keep doing things, and the beauty of an acquisition, I think, is you always learn something. Every deal you do, they do something better than you do. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's great. We should do that for the whole firm. And then there's things you're doing maybe more effective than them, and they want to be part of that. If you start getting down the line where someone's like, no, what we're doing is working great. No, just, why don't you kind of leave us alone? That's not going to work for us generally. I think others that have an acquisition strategy that says, hey, listen, we want to be a collection of businesses, that can work for them. That's antithetical to how we look at the world.
How do you ultimately integrate these companies to make them work post-close? And
I think you have to have a plan. You got to start working on a plan the minute you start talking to them. And we've become really sophisticated in how we integrate lateral managing directors. We hear it when we onboard a lateral managing director. And even if someone's worked at a couple of other firms, they're like, they've never seen anything as detailed, as organized. We have check-ins every 6 months. So I think you have to find a way to say, how do we get them integrated into our processes and systems? How do we get them integrated into our culture? So when we've done acquisitions, we've taken that playbook from our lateral MDs to kind of make sure you get them integrated. I also think, particularly for tuck-ins like TCG and Spurrier, kind of day one, integrate them. Get them on your CRM system. Get them under your brand. And there's some pain to that, right? You kind of but really kind of saying, hey, get integrated into our systems, get integrated into our CRM system, our performance review management system. But a lot of it will, the revenue in these businesses are driven by managing directors. So if you can get them very integrated, get their people on your systems and processes sooner rather than later. And again, there's some disruption to that, but I actually think it's better than saying, well, over time we'll move you on to what we're doing. I think you do the acquisition, you get them onto your systems, and you move forward.
Pretty aggressive on the tech integration part.
Yeah, we have been. We've been very aggressive on that.
This has been helpful. I like the examples too, walking away from a deal, because I feel like that's the hardest thing to do.
It is hard to do, and because you spend a lot of time, but my own view on that is trust your gut. Like when my gut starts telling me, hey, this isn't going to work out, or because you can become enamored with the commercial case, right? But in any acquisition, you can't discount the cultural case. In professional services, where your people are your product, it's the most important thing.
That's so important. That's the hardest thing to do sometimes.
Yep, it is.
Especially if you sign an LOI, then you're really invested in.
Yeah, no, it is. But like I said, I think the commercial and cultural assessment, it
continues.
It keeps going on, and you got to respond to what you're hearing back.
Let's talk about the dynamics, buyer, seller. I put a whole framework called buyer-led M&A, Rob, and this was my observation of doing hundreds of these interviews and working with a bunch of corporate buyers. And I've noticed the evolution. The first deal they do, they don't really know what they're doing. It's a lot of times very seller-driven, but then you do 10 deals and the process becomes more and more buyer-driven, whether it's starting from how you source deals and just having that clear North Star, then being proactive. And even if that deal goes in a bank process, you at least have a relationship already there to leverage, to the integration of just putting that front and center and just having a process where you can iteratively update your integration plan as you do the deal. And the question always comes up too is what do you do in a bank process? Because the bankers control the whole process. And I'm just curious of how do you sort of look at it? Because now you've been on the buy side and you've kind of been through it on a proprietary deal and a bank deal.
Yeah, we did one of each. We had a proprietary deal and a bank deal. They weren't that different. I think even on the bank deal, what Spurrier told us, Clark Spurrier, who was the founder, said, you guys weren't the highest value. I just felt you were going to be the best home for our business. Now, you have to be at an acceptable value. And my sense is the other acquirers whose businesses were commercial banks and maybe even foreign commercial banks. And, that's a whole other ball of wax. And I think he was worried about his people staying through that. I laugh when you say buyer-driven M&A because, coming out of the global financial crisis, really through kind of mid-2022, it was kind of a seller-driven market. Sellers could dictate, we had zero cost of capital, tons of money to put to work. Every process had multiple parties. You had these highly competitive processes, so the sellers can kind of dictate the process.
It was insane. There was like non-exclusive processes where you essentially had to show up with a purchase agreement.
Yeah. And there's still some of those going on. But now I think once you got, when inflation spiked and the rapid increase in cost of capital and then the fear of the recession in 2023 and really from kind of mid-2022 to mid-2024, I think the M&A market was going through a recalibration. Right, you had to recalibrate. Cost of capital is higher, and economic uncertainty, and it really wasn't until probably mid 2024 you started seeing us start to get back to a little bit more normalized M&A market. You saw that through January and February, and then given what's happened with the tariffs, that's put a little bit of a wrench. I think there was, and we saw it too. I think we had a lot more confidence that this M&A market was going to continue to improve in 2025 as it did in 2024. A little more unclear now because,
right.
But my point is, I think the market started recalibrating, and for the last couple of years, it's been more of a buyer-driven market, right? And I mean, the buyers could dictate the process more, and they could dictate what they wanted more because you didn't have as deep of a hand, or you didn't have. Now, for the really high-performing businesses, the A-quality businesses, you still had really seller-driven processes because there were so few deals in the market and people wanted to put money to work that the really high-quality deals, they looked a lot. The processes looked a lot like kind of 21 kind of deals. Just the values were slightly lower. But I do think even right now, I think there's still more leverage that buyers have in this market than they did at the peak of the market.
I was curious. It comes up because, we sell a really badass tool to manage M&A on the buy side.
Yep.
And the thing you got to do is take control of the process when an LOI signed, so you can do all your integration planning and diligence work stream and like tie them together. That's the magic of it. It works really well in a proprietary deal. It's not hard to get that arrangement. But when it's a bank process, competitive, sure. You just got to replicate it and build your own environment. But once you sign an LOI, that's like, is there leverage to say, hey, we're going to get through diligence faster and better plan post-close?
Yeah, I do think, it's funny because most of our deals, we're not signing an LOI, we're going right to a purchase agreement. And there's generally not exclusivity given. Sometimes there is. A lot of times it's kind of a handshake saying, hey, we're not going to give you written exclusivity, but this deal's yours if you sign the purchase agreement by this date, as opposed to signing an LOI. Sometimes we are signing an LOI, and it's a little different geography to geography. But the best seller leverage is a competitive process. That's the best seller leverage.
More competitive.
So, and what sellers are always worried about is that the buyer is going to change the price and terms if we give them too much time to sign this, right? And what the buyer is always worried about is, am I going to have time to complete all my diligence and really think through integration before I have to sign this? And that's the tension that you have to manage. And, one of the things you brought up that I think is really important is spending time with companies, even if they end up hiring an advisor, like spending time with companies in advance of that's going to put you at an advantage, right? The more they know you, the more they feel like, hey, you could be the right partner. And the private equity groups that invest in that and get on the road and meet management teams well in advance of a sale process, they tend to do better in those sale processes. And it could also be because they're willing to pay more because they've gotten to know the team over a longer period of time. But it also could be that the team says, hey, I'm willing to take some discount to the highest price to do a deal with this acquirer because I think they're the best home for me and my people.
So that's there's investment in that relationship ahead of time. There's what the buyer thinks is a good home. Is there anything else that separates an average buyer from an elite buyer in a competitive process?
I think there's several things. If you and we see all flavors of it, right? Because we're one of the most active sell side advisors on the planet. I think one is really trying to find a way to authentically connect with management. And that starts at the dinner. It's little things even. You're in a management presentation. And if you got a buyer that's checking their phones and not you're not going to win, right? Like put your phones away, put your computers away, come into that room to meet management 100% focused on them. And the other thing that, we'll get buyers that will ask, they'll say, hey, we love meeting management, the management presentation. We'd love to fly out and spend a little more time with them, right? And the worst that's going to happen is, the seller is going to say, I don't want to do that. No. But a lot of times it's like, oh, yeah, actually, yeah, management would like you don't get if you don't ask. And so I think if I think about things that have really distinguished buyers in a process, one is investing on meeting management before a process happens. Particularly if it's a private equity owned business, at some point it's going to be sold. So go and if you think that's a business you want to own or a sector you want to be in, find a way to get in front of that management team. And then even when the process comes, push to spend more time with them, right? And get them to authentically, you want to authentically develop, relationships. I also think that kind of doing what you say you're going to do as well. We've seen some buyers that everything's great, and then as they get in the process, they're like, well, we need this, 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 and this. And you're like, well, you didn't bring that up a while ago. And a lot of those things may not even be unreasonable things that they want, but they've upset the management team by the management team feeling like, well, wait a minute, why didn't we talk about this stuff earlier? So get out up front the things that are going to be important to you to get to the finish line. So there's no surprises at the end or no surprises during the process, because deals are built on trust, and the more you can continue to build trust with the seller and the management team, the more successful you're going to be at the end of that process.
If you're flipping it around, what are the things that the sellers do to run the table? Like, what do the best sellers do, in terms of the operators to manage the sale process?
Well, one, I think you got to be ready before you go to the market, right? And there's plenty of companies that we've advised where we said, hey, listen, we're not ready. You're not ready from a data standpoint. You're not ready. You got too many holes in your management team. So I think you do need to spend time thinking about, hey, am I ready? Do I have confidence in the visibility of my business? Do I have my data lined up to withstand a diligence process? Do I have the right people on my team? Right. So I think, again, it's never going to be perfect, but I think you need to spend time up front. What's interesting, we've run a few processes recently, and in certain groups, they're doing this more and more, where we have meetings with buyers in person before we even get indications of interest from them, right? So it's a little incumbent upon us knowing the market to say who are the right people to get in front of you, but we have management teams that have said, listen, I want to meet everybody and be able to tell my story, and then we can find out where they're at on value. But I think sometimes management teams feel it's almost too transactional. Like they really haven't met anybody. These bids have come in, and they're like, okay, well, yeah. So what's interesting, I think that's better for the sellers. I also think it's better for the buyers too. But we are seeing more and more and more of that. And then you give them access to information. Then you say, hey, come to us with a value. Well, at this point, it's more than an indication of interest. You know what I mean? They've met management. They've gotten some information. They're now giving you their initial value. That's one. It should be a value that's more substantiated. But two, they've been able to hear the story in management's words and get comfortable. This is a team I want to back, and management's gotten more comfort with them. And so I think sellers that are able to approach it that way, I think end up with better outcomes. What you may miss is, well, we didn't scour the market. We didn't go to the market and get indications of interest from 100 different parties. You may have to get over did we miss somebody? But I think if you have the right advisor that really knows that sector and knows who the right strategic acquirers are going to be and the right financial sponsors and curates a process around those, what we've seen, particularly in this market, is those have been pretty effective.
Hey, so from the time we first met, like a decade ago,
yeah.
Have you changed the way you would take a company to market working with your customers?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more what I said. I think the process is today, one, we've become much more organized along sectors and subsectors of expertise. So if you go back 20 years ago, it was a little bit more of a generalist market. Maybe you'd have a consumer banker or an industrial banker. Well, now you've got a food banker, you've got a consumer services banker, you've got a pet banker. I think the deep and relevant knowledge in each sector, I think, allows sellers to curate a process more around the right buyers as opposed to going as broad and trying to narrow it down. I think that has been a major, major change. Interesting, I think two other major changes in the industry over the last 20 years that I think have accrued to both the benefit of the buyer and the seller. One is the electronic data room, right? The ability to share information, to customize information, to track. I think that's accelerated. The other thing I think that's changed the M&A market in a really material way is the advent of rep and warranty insurance, because there was, when you're negotiating a purchase agreement, the buyer and the seller, who are going to be married at some point, they go through this contentious process to negotiate this agreement. Rep and warranty insurance has taken out a lot of that, because if you can get an agreement that the underwriters view as market, then it's the underwriters, it's the insurance company's problem. And even if there's claims afterwards, you don't have a private equity group filing a claim against its management team, right? The insurance company stands behind it. And so I think those two things, I think they've added a lot of efficiency into the M&A process over the last couple of decades.
What do you see killing deals more? Bad diligence, bad timing, bad chemistry?
It's a really poignant question right now, right? Because we have all these deals in the market, and then the global trade paradigm gets turned on its head, and now there's much more concern of a recession than there was a month ago. And so I think, and again, what's interesting, the deals we have in the market are largely moving towards completion, but everyone's kind of waiting to launch things till there's a little more clarity. And to me, the thing that kills deals the most is uncertainty about the future. I think if you have certainty about the future, even if there's certainty that it's going to get bad, or there's certainty that it's going to improve, that sort of certainty, I think, gives buyers and sellers more conviction to get a deal done, particularly buyers. I think when you have uncertainty, that's when CEOs and investors start saying, well, I'm just uncertain about the future, and that uncertainty needs to be priced into my deal. And I think that's the thing that kills deals.
That's what makes it tough in this market.
It's rare, I think, in today's day and age that a diligence item kills a deal. Normally, if it does, there's some off-balance sheet risk that didn't get disclosed. There's an environmental liability, but it is rare that kills a deal. I think the two things that kill a deal are uncertainty about the future and the company missing its forecast during the sale process, right? Making your forecast during the sale process is incredibly important, because it's not just a math issue. It's not just, you missed your forecast by 10%, so our bid's going to come down 10%. It gets to a management credibility issue, saying, well, wait a minute, you gave us this forecast 2-3 months ago, and now you're missing it. Do you really have a handle on your business? And so that, I would say, those two things, just general uncertainty and then missing the forecast during the process, those kill deals.
You got to be on point in both those areas, and then uncertainty, that's a whole other thing to.
Yeah, and that's hard. That's hard to control. And again, I think we're in a period of uncertainty right now. And is that period of uncertainty going to last weeks or months? And it's hard to answer that.
Have you going back to the process side, you kind of gave the overview about how the sell side's changed. How about the buy side? Do you see buyers taking different approaches when it comes to diligence? Integration is a big one. I think that's the one that you sort of see that push, which is tough to get all the information you want to do that, especially before you sign. So what are you seeing?
I would say in the last couple of years, since the market kind of slowed down in mid-2022, it's a lot harder to push buyers on diligence, right? They're going to do their diligence at the time frame they need to do it. Where I think in a hotter market, they may be willing to accelerate it or even maybe forego some of it in order to win the deal. I think we're still in a market where it's harder and harder to push buyers on timing until they feel like, okay, I've got everything done.
So that makes sense. If just market sort of dictates a lot of this. If you got leverage, more competitive, less leverage you have.
100%. And I think one of the things that's interesting, in kind of the peak of the market, not even in the peak, really, if you go back to kind of 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. I mean, 19 may be the last normal year we've had, if whatever normal is, right? Because 20 was COVID, 2021 was this crazy kind of catch-up year. 2022, the bottom fell out of the market, and we've been kind of in this recalibration. But I think for a long period of time, maybe too long a period of time, sellers would go to market, they'd see if they could get that strategic outlier that would value a bunch of synergies, and if they couldn't, they could get a really good price from a private equity group because debt was nearly free and there was all this capital floating around, and business performance was up and to the right for 8 or 9 years. I think we're in a market now where you get that strategic outlier, or you get that strategic that can value synergies, but then if you don't, there can be a big fall off from that. And maybe there's one private equity group there that's at an acceptable value, maybe two, whereas in the heyday of this market, if you couldn't get that great price, it was really easy to get a really good price or really good value. And that's, I think, been harder to do, and particularly for businesses that maybe have been a little more performance challenged.
Going back to good old days. Not quite.
I don't know.
I think we'll go back to like 20 years ago.
What's interesting, if you look at 2024, and I'll just look at the U.S. for right now, and I think a bellwether for is the M&A market improving or not is private equity, right? Because they buy and sell companies for a living. They monitor the markets really well. They stay on top of their companies really well. And in 2022 and 2023, you saw big fall-offs in private equity sell sides. I mean, you could argue there's some studies that say that market was down like 50%. It was down more than the overall M&A market. Well, you saw that improve in 2024. That was the first kind of up year. And in the U.S., I think private equity sell sides were up 11 or 12%. And so we came into the year feeling like, okay, that should improve this year. Maybe it'll be 15%, maybe as high as 20%. 60%, roughly, it's estimated roughly 60% of companies sitting in private equity today in the U.S. were acquired in 21 or 2022. That's a massive, massive number. Those are the deals kind of done at the peak of the market that are taking a little bit longer to create equity value or maybe aren't creating equity value. That's the wall of deals that will need to come to the market at some point. Our expectation was that was not going to happen in 2025. That probably happens in 26 or beyond, but that we were going to see an improving M&A market. And we saw that in Q1. Like Q1, our performance was up materially, but now you're seeing a bit of an air pocket in taking new deals to market. So just this uncertainty around the trade, and will that force us into a recession, it's causing a bit of a slowdown. And the question is this just a speed bump, or does this cause some prolonging of kind of getting to a return to a normal M&A market?
We keep creating more and more private capital products. I think I don't know how big we made private credit, and then now we got these perpetual funds that are pulling more private capital in.
Well, I think that's, as the institutional investors haven't had the returns of capital that they needed. So now private equity is saying, well, the institutional guys are kind of tapped out. Where else can I go? Well, I'm going to go to retail, right? So you're seeing these retail funds and these interval funds. And so there is a lot of money. There's like an incredible amount of credit funds. There's an incredible amount of dry private equity powder. There's an incredible amount of companies sitting in private equity. So, and those are getting more age. So all the ingredients are there to have a real rebound in M&A activity, particularly in the private capital markets. And it's going to come at some point. It kind of has to. And it looked like we were going to be on that trajectory to continue that this year. And maybe we still will. But right now, when you just think about the uncertainty economically that's been caused by the announcement of these tariffs, people are in a bit of a wait-and-see attitude. I mean, put yourself in a CEO's position, right? All right, should I reshore something? Is this all just negotiating tactics? They're trying to figure out, where do I invest? And if they don't have certainty about that, M&A is something that suffers.
Wait, explain that last part again, because...
So if you're, part of a CEO's job is to invest for the future and to allocate capital. And again, it gets to my point. When you have confidence about the future, you're willing to do that. I mean, if you put yourself right now in a CEO's shoes, where
more uncertainty,
we're going to have
reluctant to do M&A.
We're going to have these incredible tariffs, and they're here to stay. And then it's, well, no, they're not. We're just using these to negotiate better trade deals. And we haven't announced any better trade deals yet. Like, I think there's just what should I do, right? I'm not going to reshore a factory if this is negotiating, but maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I just think that as you think about one of the ingredients you have to have for a really healthy M&A market is optimism about the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's cloudier today than it was 30 days ago.
I was curious about just the firm and how you sort of organically grew up, but then the partnerships and the partnerships could evolve into acquisitions. That's just something I was just generally curious about. And then the AI stuff, which I know you've been big on that, and I want to talk about that. I don't know in 10 minutes if we got time to cover both, but it's up to you.
Why don't we cover AI? Because I think that's been...
Let's do that. The other one I can always come back to.
Yeah, I think that's been an important part of our strategy. We formed an AI committee probably 2 years ago now, and we formed about 30 people across the firm, all levels, various geographies, various product groups, various industry groups. And we wanted younger people, we wanted some older people on that. And we tasked that committee to come up with, what do you think the most impactful use cases for AI in our business might be? And we said, and think big, like think broadly, think kind of white space. That committee came up with 9 use cases to use AI in our business. We then kind of plotted these use cases on 2 axes, the ones that would be, level of impact and ease of implementation. Because some of these, really would be fantastic. They'd be really harder to implement. And we decided, let's do 1 or 2 of these really well, right? Let's roll these out. Let's use AI. And the 2 that kind of fell out of the analysis was what we call the Lincoln Library and the Lincoln Deal Sheets. So the Lincoln Library was, if we could aggregate all of our data, right, all of our pitches, all of our information memorandums, all of the industry studies that get done on our deals, all of the notes we have in Salesforce, if we could organize that data in a way where you could search that data and analyze that data with generative AI, that would be an incredible, we would be able to share insights with our clients, so much more effectively. And so that's called the Lincoln Library. And then we did the Lincoln Deal Sheet, where basically every deal has an AI page where all the data we get from the client, we can then analyze with our AI tool. So those were the 2 we decided to do. And our AI platform is called Link, L-I-N-C. We then determined, all right, where are we going to get this technology from? Is there off-the-shelf technology? Is it something we're going to build on our own? Is there something in between? We ended up working with McKinsey. We developed a proprietary tool, as I said, called Link. So today, we've got 5 years of all of our data that every banker has Link on their, they have the Link platform on their computer. And you can now go in and say, what are the latest trends in animal health M&A? And it'll paragraphs on it. We'll drill down in this paragraph. You could go in and say, hey, I'm looking for the last 5 pitches on enterprise software globally. Drill down for, I'm looking for a specific slide on customer concentration. I've got this company in this sector. Give me a list of the private equity firms that have expressed interest in this sector. It'll scrape all of our CRM notes. So the quality of information and knowledge sharing that we have now is fantastic. So we really did this from an effectiveness standpoint, but what it's also resulted in is a lot of efficiencies. So things that might have taken an analyst or an associate, if they were tasked to do it hours or even days, they're getting in minutes. And this is a tool that just keeps building on itself. We keep training people how to prompt. We've also loaded Safe GPT, so we can upload data into GPT that won't go out outside of our firewalls, but still analyze it against it. So we're a knowledge-based business. I think AI is going to affect almost every business. It's clearly going to affect knowledge-based businesses. And we have a roadmap for not only more enhancements of the 2 we have, but ultimately rolling out some of these other use cases over time. So, we think we're a little bit ahead. To our knowledge, none of our competitors have a functioning AI product.
I like that a lot because it's you focused on the intelligence piece. It wasn't just some tactical automation of little things to click.
Right.
That's sort of pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it took a lot of work, and we had to get our data organized in the right way to create this data lake, and we're learning every day, teaching people how to prompt better. If you can have the tool, but if you're not really teaching people how to use it, and so we're hitting our adoption goals on it. So and again, everything we do is through the lens of what's best for our clients, right? And if we can knowledge share and be able to share. If something's going on in a Milan office and they've got some information that's really relevant to a deal we're doing in the U.S., we can get it. We're going to be less likely to miss that. The old days of sending out an email saying, "Hey, does anybody have anything on this?"
That's pretty impressive.
Incredibly inefficient.
That's pretty impressive. What do you see? What's next? You look forward in the next 3-5 years.
I'll tell you one of the things that's interesting. I think AI is going to help us really analyze buyer behavior. Like you have a deal, and if you really think about having all the data, saying who are the 5 private equity groups that are most likely to stretch for this deal, right? And we have this data, we analyze it on our own, but having an AI tool that can look at what they've invested in the past and where they've had returns, and what have they paid for things like getting to kind of AI predictive behavior of investors. I think it's going to go there. I don't think it's going there tomorrow, but I think it's going to go there.
You think you'd like almost advise them to strengthen their business case on just some of that data?
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting is I won't say the private equity group, but they now have an AI bot on their investment committee. So when they are voting, should we do this deal or not, the AI bot votes as well, and they're going to track. They're going to track how did the AI bot vote versus others, and over time, was it more or less correct as they see how some of these investments play out?
That's been interesting. I've been doing that with some of my calls. I have like a prompt to extract the takeaways I want, very specific, but then I'll have it score the productivity of the call.
Yeah,
but it's almost.
I hope this interview gets a high productivity score.
We'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out when you run it through AI.
I did this similar exercise. How you had all these different use cases on the buy side, and I went through it to sort of validate what's the number one use case. You know what that was?
What?
Reducing legal fees. Everybody wanted we ended up building contract analysis just to you got the 100 customer contracts, which one has change of control provisions.
So one of the 9 use cases that our committee came up with revolved around legal efficiency.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the buy side, that's what I ended up with, and I would say probably there's a bias there because we work with quite a few roll-ups. Yep. That was the top thing that came up was that they wanted to reduce the legal expense. Hey, so the biggest thing I had to ask, I was so excited about, was what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A? Being that you operate this global firm that does hundreds, thousands of deals a year.
So I think the craziest story that I've seen in M&A is, and this goes back a few years, but we were selling a business that was an aerospace and defense components business, and this is going back a ways because it goes back to 9/11, and we got bids on the business. Really strong bids. We were having management presentations, and 9/11 hit. And if you were an aerospace and defense company, and this was a lot of commercial aerospace, everything kind of got put on hold, right? And so it gets put on hold, and business actually performed well. And so the dust settles, 8-9 months, a year after 9/11, that there'll be some changes to, the airports and commercial aerospace, but we're going to move forward. And so we go to move forward, and the owner of this business passed away in the interim. He had cancer, and one of the reasons he was selling is he wanted to have his estate in order. And he had passed away, and he had been married earlier in his life, and he never had children. But he had cancer early in his life, and he was going to go through treatment. And so he ended up actually freezing some of his sperm. He ends up divorcing that woman. He has a live-in girlfriend after that. Well, when he passed, she got all of his possessions, including, the sperm he had saved from an earlier marriage. She impregnated herself with that, and then claimed that that her unborn son was going to be the heir to the sale proceeds of this business, which you can't make this up. Wow. And so we go back. We say, hey, let's get going again, and the estate attorney's like, well, we got to work through a little bit of an issue here. We don't think she has a legal claim because he wanted a lot of the money to go to charity and some foundations. And that ended up delaying the process, 8 or 9 months. And then their biggest customer came in, recut their contract, and that business ended up trading for about half of what it would have from the bids originally. But it was probably the craziest thing we've seen in that. That was so. If I don't know if we can air that story or not, but in my professional life, that's probably one of the craziest things I've seen in the deal world.
Well, if you're listening to it, that might be a Hall of Fame. M&A craziest story.
Yeah, it was, and I think she ended up losing. So she had the child, but did not get all the proceeds from
Wow.
from the. But anyway, that's a crazy story.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
The lengths we go to get a piece of the pie, I guess.
Yeah, that was a high risk strategy for her.
Rob, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate taking the time, teaching me a lot of things, negotiating, and helping me become a better M&A scientist.
It is always great to catch up with you. And like I said, it's been we've known each other a long time, and it's been great to see the success you've had.